In the city of Ogdensburg in 1872, there was an unfortunate murder that happened to a woman that could have easily been avoided. Now, I just kind of want to warn everybody this is a bit of a controversial topic, and there might be some parts of this which are a little bit maybe tough to hear, and times were different in the late 1800s. I've been told I was never there, but consider yourself warned that this could be a little bit controversial. Either way, I'm Matt,
And I'm Meg.
and this is the Yore Town Podcast. Hey, Meg.
Hey.
What's up?
What's up?
Ready to do this?
Sure.
This is gonna be fun. The reason I say it's fun is because it's a pretty dark story. It's a pretty dark past of an area that's really close to where we're living today. And I was talking to some people before we pressed record on this, and they were like, "What? This happened?" So anytime you find a story like this, it's very intriguing to me. So yeah, 1872, a wild year. There's also going to be some names of some doctors that are going to be pretty hard to pronounce. So I do apologize in advance if I do pronounce them wrong. It's a long time ago. If you happen to be a cousin or a relative of them, I do apologize. So, ready to get in this?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's jump into this. Does this still work?
Sure.
Sure. All right. The year was 1872, and Maria Shay was pronounced dead and was a victim to an abortion gone wrong. And again, this is a topic that we're not going to dive into, and it's a little bit controversial sometimes and for certain people. So I just wanted to get that warning out of the way earlier. Now you know. So who was Maria Shay? Well, Maria was a female who was originally from Morrisburg, New York. She moved to Waddington, New York, where she lived for several years. And that was kind of a connection to the North Country, to Ogdensburg, living pretty close. Waddington's about 15, 20 minutes from Ogdensburg, for anybody that doesn't know. And that is actually where the murder occurred. So after she lived in Waddington for a while, she then packed up and moved to Pennsylvania. It was in the town of Pennsylvania that it was really hard to pronounce, and I just didn't look into it. So we're going to say Pennsylvania. Not that anybody overly cares unless you're from Pennsylvania, but either way, you're there. She lived there with her sister around 1871. Apparently, she got into a little bit of a bind when she was down there and decided to take the Rome Railroad back to the North Country March 7th, 1871. At this time, she was 5 months pregnant, and she came up here on the Rome Railroad with enough cash on hand to have the abortion. She arrived in the town and was reported by, you guessed it, the St. Lawrence Republican. I think they've made an appearance in every episode, that she went straight to the Baldwin house with the intent of producing a miscarriage. So again, got into a little bit of a bind, comes up with a bunch of money, and takes a train, goes right there. So she was instructed, as soon as she gets into town, to send a note to Dr. McMonigal. All right. I'm pretty
That's
sure.
how I would say it.
Okay. I'm going to probably say it about 5 different ways in this episode, but we know it's Dr. McMonigal. And who is this doctor? Oh, funny you might ask. Let's give a little history on this guy. All right. So his real name, Peter Reed McMonigal, who worked with a doctor. Oh, man. How do you say this one? Everest.
I have no idea. I would say Everest.
I'm going to go with Munjon or Mungion. I'm going to say Munjon, who is Canadian and a physician who many people really didn't know. McMonigal, on the other hand, well, yeah, a lot of people knew him. He made headlines just a couple of years earlier when he was indicted on charges of manslaughter. And guess what? An abortion death of Mrs. June Hubbard of Ogdensburg. Apparently, though, there was lack of evidence and witnesses, and he was acquitted. Not only was he acquitted, he was actually congratulated right after, and they actually threw a party for him. Isn't that disgusting?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if he was totally innocent and they put a party. Either way, again, the St. Lawrence Republican again said that the evening that the doctor arrived home in this city, he was serenaded by his friends who employed the Oswegatchie Band for that purpose. Shout out to the Oswegatchie Band. Also, shout out to the Oswegatchie River Boys. All right, a band with a couple of my dudes. Maybe it was their relatives in the Oswegatchie Band, but either way, they got the Oswegatchie Band. They celebrated that. So he gets off of murder. 2 years later, finds himself in another abortion murder case.
Dun, dun, dun.
There it is. I was wondering how you were going to sneak that in. I like it. So I mean, pretty wild so far, right? I mean, you have two doctors and at least two females. Both of them are dead at this point in the story. St. Lawrence Republican is there, and you're probably wondering a little more details, like myself. Let's get into some details. There is some details that are a little bit gross, but I've kind of lightened them up for the episode. So, any questions, Megh, or you caught right up?
I'm caught up.
I see you're actually on the edge of your seat, so you're into this one.
Yeah, I forgot to raise it up, so
Oh,
it's a little low.
okay. Insert low rider. Okay. We'll probably get copyright for that. But either way, Miss Shay, who let's get back to this, is at the Baldwin house, wrote the note, and then was called on by a Mrs. A. Allen. All right. So Mrs. A. Allen then goes to Miss Shay's room at the house, and they have an interview. After the interview, it was decided that Shay would go to Mrs. Allen's house the next day and stay there until the following Friday. They were staying over a store on the corner of River and Lake Street in Ogdensburg. Current day, I busted out the Google Maps, and we could go and take pictures, but we found out that if you go and take pictures at random places that aren't the places, they're the same places, but they're much different places now in cities, that some of these people don't like you taking pictures of their place. So we're probably not going to do that.
I think that's a wise choice.
Yes, and this building is in pretty rough shape. It does appear to have been the storefront. I'm pretty sure that this is the place. We'll try to throw it up on the Instagram, but either way, it's this is where they are, again, on the corner of Lake and River Street.
It does look like it potentially was a connecting building with other storefronts, and that may be the only one remaining.
Yeah, it's in an area of Ogdensburg which used to be very industrial. A lot of cheese plants and all these international plants that are just not in business. They're crumbling. They're falling down. They're trying to find money to tear these down because it is good property. I mean, really close to the river. There was a lot of booming business and everything down there, but it's just. You hate to see it. There's just empty buildings, graffiti, and just you hate to see it. But this building, pretty sure it could be the same one. I can't confirm it, but I will check with some other local people to see again if it's the same place that that this would have happened on River and Lake Street. But so the old doctor McMonigal comes in, visits the victim, or at this time not quite a victim, Friday, March 15th, 1872, and accepted a $500 payment for introducing the victim to the Dr. Mungian, the Canadian physician who was actually going to do the operation. So again, this doctor gets $500 for just making the introduction in 1872. With inflation, $500 that time is almost $12,000 today. I mean, that is a lot of money for an introduction in the surgery. So he visited, accepted the money, and apparently had nothing else to do with Miss Shay. So, I mean,
it's a lot of money to have on hand.
You aren't kidding, especially to
back
take
then, and like on a railway.
Yeah, just traveling, single mom, with to be potentially, and yeah. All right. So it was also noted that abortionists have held high sway in Augsburg for some time, and the actions of the people had a huge effect on the public's perception and reputation of all the medical fields. But apparently it didn't stop people from all over the state, all over the country, that were desperately traveling to Augsburg via train, whatever, and no matter how they could get there, to kind of take care of these illicit matters. And the more you read and you research, Ogdensburg, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was geographical or what was going on, it was the place to come up and have these illicit matters performed on there. And from what you read, there was a lot of issues, a lot more manslaughters, and there is some laws and stuff that were put in place that we're going to jump into in just a second here. But it just seems like an interesting thing. In to kind of go back into a couple of episodes, you remember, Megh, you're seeing the bootlegging, you're seeing high-speed chases, you're seeing all sorts of just wild things, German Nazis in the city of Augsburg.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just crazy history there, and even with everything that's been going on in the city recently, it's just some wild history, and I don't know what's going on, but it's crazy. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's wild. And unfortunately, the rules that we're going to talk about right now, they were in place, but just like bootlegging and prohibition, there's places and areas that just don't follow the law. So New York, like we just mentioned, did have abortion laws, and they went into effect in 1830. So 42 years before all of this. So, and the law kind of said when an attempt to induce abortion at any stage of pregnancy, whether it was drugs or instruments, it was considered a punishable act and would call for a year in prison. And it was considered second-degree manslaughter. 1 year in prison for second-degree manslaughter. I mean,
Yeah.
both of us are speechless. We're just shaking our heads like, 1 year? Again, this is 1830. Maybe a year in prison was a lot different back there, but a year in prison for something like that nowadays is, yeah. But there was an exception in New York that if abortion was clearly necessary to save the life of the woman, as advised by not one but two doctors, then it was deemed okay. So, I mean, I could see that. I just can't get past the 1 year in prison for doing this. But, hey, I wasn't around then, and we're not getting into it. But then in 1845, you know what? The law was then amended to make the pregnant woman who had knowingly submitted to an abortion guilty of a misdemeanor crime. So, I mean, they're knowing it, so they're going to charge the woman as well. But then in 1881, the law was further amended to make both the woman and the doctor both guilty of manslaughter if an abortion was performed after there was like a quickening, which I guess the quickening stage or something is usually between 14 and 21 weeks of a pregnancy. So again, in 1881, they said, hey, you're both guilty if in this 14 to 21 weeks of this pregnancy, and it's very likely that Maria Shay had already experienced the quickening. So, I mean, so that's the rule. So obviously, 1881 was just a little bit after this incident, but by 1845, I mean, there was plenty of laws in place for this. So again, Mungeon and several female witnesses were questioned in the death of Shay. McMonigal left the town before, I'm going to say it, shit hit the fan, as they say, right? Which is a weird thing. Maybe we should do a whole story of why it's called shit hitting the fan. That's a weird thing to say, right?
I feel like it's a farm thing.
I mean, I could see that, I guess. So he's gone. He's just like, you know what? This went down, nowhere to be found. We'll tell you later in this episode where he ended up being. But his absence left him to unchallenge, kind of legal stuff, slandering, anything else, and he's just not a part of it. Can't be found, can't be tried, I guess. So again, this is the 1800s. If it was today, probably could be tracked down with warrants and all that good stuff. They could dog the bounty hunter after him or something. But so he's gone. Then they're going to start questioning Mungeon. He was taken directly into custody to await trial after they questioned him. The evidence against him was said to be indisputable, especially after the autopsy report was released. So some of these reports are pretty gross. I did clean them up a little bit, but I wanted to kind of leave some stuff that the St. Lawrence Republican did leave in the article, just to kind of paint a picture of how really gruesome this was back in the day. So it was reported, again, by the St. Lawrence Republican that Shay paid $30 more on top of the $500 already to provide the unlawful service to this Canadian doctor. After the doctor finished the job, delivered the stillborn infant the next day, they placed it in a cigar box, attached some bricks, and just threw it in a canal. He admitted that he was under the influence of alcohol at the time of the procedure.
That's horrible.
Terrible. I mean, I just couldn't imagine. And then obviously, Miss Shay's health rapidly declined and very quickly, and then it eventually led to her death a couple of days later. Mungeon then realized he messed up. That's probably an understatement. And then reportedly tried to even sway witnesses, threaten them, whatever he had to do. And thankfully, these witnesses, which I think were reported earlier, were a lot of females, they held strong and refused to kind of stand up to his threats and everything else. So they went to trial. The jury didn't need really much time, apparently. They found him guilty. He was sentenced to 5 years in Dannemora prison. All right, which we might do an episode on Dannemora. They got some history.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, and but this blows my mind. He was only convicted of procuring and assisting to procure an abortion and was not charged with the murder of Miss Shay or the twins. And the reason I say the twins is they ended up finding out that during this procedure, she ended up having one of the children in between the hospital or the post office and the bridge. when they did the miscarriage, and that was actually the infant that they put in the box and all that nasty, horrible things. But then they ended up finding in the autopsy later that she still had a 5-month-old inside of her, which is wild. I mean, so not only should, in my opinion, I guess my opinion doesn't really mean much, he gets away with murder, not only of Megh, but 2 unborn children. That should have been 3. But you know what he gets? 5 years. 5 years in Dannemora prison. I mean,
you think he did the full sentence?
Oh, funny you asked. Well, funny you asked, but the residents of Ogdensburg then attempted to secure his early release. The people of Ogdensburg wanted him to be released early, but the Supreme Court held up, and he served his time in full. He was released January 23rd, 1877. And McMonigal, never charged. Never anything. Wasn't even questioned. And he ended up moving to Prescott, Ontario, which is right across the river from Ogdensburg, immediately after the death. And he ended up just living a respectable, normal life. Just guilt-free in court. I mean, that has to weigh on you at some point, though. I mean, knowing that you've killed multiple people and just continue to do this. But hey, he was making a ton of money, so good for you, doctor. And I guess it's kind of ironic that the time that we're saying this, there is also another hospital in Ogdensburg that a lot of the community, not nearly as bad, but there's a little bit of mistrust from what I'm hearing there as well. But either way, what a crazy story that this happened.
Did it say anywhere how old she was?
It did not say her age, at least that I saw. And when you're saying that, let's bust out the sources. It was a book by Shay Farnsworth, another book that we've read a couple of times in a couple of different articles, just like the one that is the historic North Country disaster. She also wrote that. And this one was actually the murder and mayhem in St. Lawrence County.
These books are very well written.
Very well written. So Shay Farnsworth, shout out to you. And again, if you guys want to check it out, it's all over the internet. Just a great thing. History Press put this out, historypress.net. So just a cool one. I absolutely love the stories that are in there. And again, we've already covered the Scarborough Family Massacre in a further episode. We talked about Elman Farnsworth's dreadful death. And now we talked about, in her title, she calls it The Unfortunate Murder of Maria Shay. So all right, thanks, Sherry. And that's pretty much what we had. And as always, we're going to leave you with a quote. A really strong woman accepts the war she went through and is enabled by her scars. And that was by Carly Simon. I don't know if it was fitting, but it felt fitting to me. So this is the Yore Town Podcast. Can't thank you enough, not only Megh, for joining us again, but anybody that is listened to this whole episode. Hopefully you like it. If you have anything you want us to cover in your town, this is what it's about. It's your town, your stories. We'd love to talk about it. So again, thanks for listening. And that's all we got. See you next week.
Bye.